The wind howled through the desolate ruins of what was once a thriving village. Now only the skeletal remains of broken structures and scattered debris remained. A pale orange sky, stretching endlessly above, cast a faint glow over the land, creating a haunting contrast to the emptiness below. In the distance, the shadow of a lone figure moved slowly across the barren ground, her every step weighed down by the crushing sorrow she carried. She was an alien widow. Her skin shimmered with a soft, iridescent glow, a pale bluish hue that reflected the dim light of the dying planet she called home. Her large, tear-filled eyes glistened with the weight of a grief so deep that it seemed to have consumed every part of her being. She had lost everything: her partner, her home, and most painfully, her sense of purpose. With each step, she thought of the past, before the devastation had struck. Her life had once been full of joy, love, and laughter. She had shared it all with her partner, and together they had raised a beautiful family. But now, those days seemed like a distant dream, a forgotten time that would never return. The tragic events that had unfolded in the blink of an eye had torn her world apart. The planet she had loved and cherished had fallen into chaos, destroyed by forces beyond their control. In the wake of the catastrophe, her partner had died, leaving her alone to care for their children. Now, as the last survivor of her family, the alien widow found herself wandering the barren landscape, searching for something, anything, to bring her a sense of hope. But all she saw were the remains of what once was, a thriving world now reduced to rubble. The ground was cracked and dry, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The land was as broken as her heart. Her eyes fell on her children, the small figures who clung to each other for comfort as they huddled together by a crumbling stone structure. Their clothes were tattered, their faces pale from hunger, and their eyes were filled with an innocence that made her heart ache with unbearable sorrow. These were the children she had promised to protect, to care for, and to love. Yet, despite her every effort, they were now homeless, abandoned, and alone. The alien widow had always believed in the strength of love, the love she had for her children, the love she had shared with her partner, and the love she had once felt for her planet. But now, that love felt like a distant memory. In its place, there was only loneliness. The once vibrant bond that had held her family together was now shattered beyond repair. And as she gazed upon her children, she realized that she was powerless to fix what had been broken. "Who will help us?" she whispered to the wind, her voice barely audible above the howling storm. She glanced up at the sky, her gaze searching for any sign of hope, any sign that there was someone out there who might hear her cry. But the sky was empty, cold, and indifferent. She had tried everything. She had sent messages across the stars, reaching out to any beings who might be willing to help, to offer even a small glimmer of compassion. But no one had answered. The messages had gone unanswered, swallowed by the vastness of space. And now, with every passing day, the hope that she had once held so tightly began to fade, leaving only an empty void. The wind shifted, and the widow turned her gaze back to her children. Her heart clenched as she watched them. They were young, too young to understand the full extent of their loss. But they knew enough. They knew that their world had been torn apart, that their father was gone, and that they were alone. The widow could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty that clouded their minds. She could see how they clung to each other for support, afraid that they would lose each other just as they had lost everything else. Her heart broke as she knelt down beside them, brushing the dust from their faces with trembling hands. "It's okay," she whispered softly. "I will protect you. I will never let anything happen to you." But even as she spoke, she knew that her words were empty. She could no longer protect them. Not in this world. Not in this place. For the first time in her life, the widow felt the weight of defeat. She had always believed that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. But now she saw that love alone was not enough to save her children. Love could not heal the wounds of a broken world. Love could not bring back her partner. Love could not reverse the destruction that had torn apart their lives. As she sat there, cradling her children in her arms, she felt the sting of a bitter truth. She was alone. And her loneliness was a deep, suffocating pain that gnawed at her soul. She had no one left. No family. No friends. No community. She was a widow, a mother, and a survivor in a world that had forgotten her. A world that had abandoned her. She wiped away the tears that had fallen down her face, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full extent of her grief. It was raw, unrelenting, and all-consuming. She had lost everything: her partner, her home, her future. And now, she feared that she was about to lose her children too. The thought of them slipping away from her, of them succumbing to the same fate that had claimed so many others, was more than she could bear. But even in the depths of her despair, something stirred within her, a flicker of hope, a spark of determination. She could not give up. Not yet. She had to keep fighting. For her children. For the memory of her partner. For the future that was still out there, waiting for them. She stood up, her gaze firm and resolute as she turned toward the horizon. The journey ahead would be long, and it would be filled with hardship. But she was not ready to let go. Not yet. Her children needed her. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. A chance that someone, somewhere, would hear her plea. A chance that they might be saved. "Please," she whispered, looking up at the sky one last time. "Please, hear my cry. Help us." The wind howled again, but this time, it was different. There was something in the air, something that made her pause, something that made her heart race. For a brief moment, she felt a presence, a flicker of hope that was more than just the wind. And with that, she knew she had to keep going. She had to keep trying. Because somewhere out there, there had to be someone who would answer her cry. The children huddled together in the corner of a crumbling building, the wind howling through the shattered windows, carrying the scent of dust and decay. Their small, fragile bodies were covered in tattered clothes, a far cry from the vibrant, colorful outfits they once wore in a time long gone. Their faces, once full of laughter and light, were now pale and worn, streaked with the remnants of tears. Their eyes, wide and fearful, darted nervously around the ruined landscape, always on alert, always searching for something or someone to keep them safe. Tarek, the eldest at only 8 years old, held his younger sister, Yara, close to his chest, his small arms wrapped around her protectively, as if the simple act of holding her could somehow shield her from the harsh world around them. Yara, barely 4, rested her head on her brother's chest, too tired to cry anymore. Her once bright eyes were dull, her innocence lost to the brutal realities of their existence. "I'm scared," Yara whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Tarek didn't answer at first. He didn't know how to. He didn't have the answers. He didn't know why everything had changed so suddenly or why their world had been destroyed. All he knew was that they were alone, and he had to protect his sister. His mother had told him that he was the man of the house now, and that meant he had to be strong. But how could he be strong when every day was a battle for survival? How could he be strong when he was just a child, too? Tarek shifted uncomfortably, looking out through the shattered window. The world beyond was a wasteland. No trees, no animals, no signs of life. The sky was perpetually dark, casting everything in a gloomy, oppressive shadow. The ground was cracked and barren, the once beautiful green fields now just a distant memory. It was a world of emptiness, a world that had no place for children like him and Yara. He glanced down at his sister, who had fallen asleep in his arms. Her face, usually full of joy, was now streaked with dirt and exhaustion. The hunger had made her weaker every day. She no longer had the energy to play, to laugh, to run around like other children should. Instead, she spent most of her days in Tarek's arms, seeking comfort in the only place she knew was safe. Tarek, too, was growing weaker. His stomach had long ago stopped growling, a sign that hunger had taken root in his body. But hunger was not his greatest fear. No, his greatest fear was that they wouldn't survive, that they wouldn't make it out of this desolate place, that their mother's plea for help, sent across the stars, would go unheard, and they would die here, forgotten. The wind blew harder, sending dust and debris swirling through the air. Tarek's eyes burned as the grit stung his face, but he refused to turn away. He had to keep watch. He had to protect Yara. The days had blurred into each other, each one feeling the same as the last. The search for food and water had become their daily routine. They would wander the ruins, looking for anything they could eat, anything that might keep them alive for just one more day. Sometimes, they were lucky and found scraps of food or broken containers of water, but most days, they went without. It was only a matter of time before their strength would fail them completely. But it wasn't just the physical hunger that tormented them. It was the loneliness. The deep, aching loneliness that gnawed at their hearts with every passing moment. They had no one left. No family. No friends. Just each other. And that was all they had. But even that felt like it might not be enough. Tarek had always been close to their mother, and he could still remember the warmth of her embrace, the way she would sing to them in the evenings to calm their fears. But now, all he had was the echo of her voice in his mind, and the memory of her soft, loving touch. He would give anything to feel that warmth again, to hear her laugh, to see her smile. But that was gone too. His mother was out there somewhere, still searching for a way to save them, still hoping that someone somewhere would hear her cry for help. But as the days passed, Tarek began to wonder if anyone would ever answer. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise, a soft rustling from the corner of the building. He froze, his heart racing. Was it an animal? A scavenger looking for food? Or worse, were there others, dangerous others, lurking in the shadows? Tarek gently shifted Yara, laying her down on the cold stone floor, and slowly crept toward the sound. His eyes narrowed, scanning the darkened corners of the building. He held his breath, waiting. And then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a small creature, no bigger than a squirrel, but with sharp, glinting eyes that reflected the faint light in the room. It was a scavenger, one of the few surviving creatures in this barren world. It darted forward, sniffing the ground as it searched for food. Tarek's heart calmed, but only for a moment. He knew this creature wouldn't help them. It couldn't give them what they needed. He needed more than scraps. He needed a way out. He needed someone to help, someone who could save them from this nightmare. As he returned to Yara's side, he noticed the hunger in her eyes. She had woken up, her tiny hands reaching out for him, her lips dry and cracked. "Brother, I'm hungry," she whispered, her voice breaking his heart. Tarek swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had no food to offer her, no way to soothe her pain. "I know, Yara," he whispered, his voice barely more than a croak. "I know." But what good were words? What good was comfort when the world was falling apart? What good was a promise when there was no way to fulfill it? He knew he couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay. It wouldn't. Not in this world. Not without help. And then, for the first time in days, something stirred inside him. A spark of hope, fragile but burning. His mother's plea echoed in his mind. "Please, someone help us." He remembered her words, her voice full of desperation. And though he had never been one to believe in miracles, in the vastness of the universe, in the stars above them, he found himself wondering, could someone hear them? Could someone somewhere answer their call? "I'm not going to let us die here," he whispered to Yara, though the words felt hollow in his chest. "We're going to be okay. I promise." But deep inside, Tarek wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. Not without help. Not without someone reaching across the stars to save them. The alien widow stood on the crumbling balcony of what was once a grand palace, her eyes fixed on the darkened sky above. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the bitter taste of salt and dust. It had been days, no, weeks, since she last made her desperate plea, but the silence that followed was deafening. The empty void of space stretched before her, vast and unfeeling, and she wondered if her message had ever reached anyone. If anyone, anywhere, was out there. Her children were asleep inside the shattered walls of their shelter, their faces pale and fragile from hunger and fear. Her heart ached as she thought of them. Her children, the last part of her family, the only part she had left. She had promised to protect them, to care for them, but every day felt like another step closer to losing them. The weight of the world bore down on her shoulders, and she wondered if she could carry it for much longer. The alien widow's eyes flicked back to the stars. Her partner was gone, taken in the initial wave of destruction that had swept across their world. And now she was alone, left with nothing but the faint, flickering memory of the life they had once shared. She could still remember the way her partner would hold her close, whispering promises of a bright future for their family. But those days were gone, lost to the cruel winds of fate. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she reached for the device that had become her lifeline, the communication array her partner had left behind. It was a simple machine, one that had once been used for peaceful communication with other civilizations, a tool to share knowledge and establish connections across the cosmos. But now, in the midst of her desperation, it was her only hope, her only way to reach out to anyone, anywhere, who might be listening. The alien widow pressed a button, and the device hummed to life, sending a signal across the stars. She had sent countless messages before, each one a heart-wrenching cry for help. But this time, she had a different message. A message that she hoped would pierce the silence. "Please, someone hear me," she whispered softly, her voice barely more than a breath. "Adopt my children. End my loneliness, human. You are our only hope." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. They spoke of her grief, her sorrow, her desperation. They spoke of the mother's love that refused to die, even in the face of unimaginable loss. And they spoke of the hope, the faintest glimmer of hope, that just maybe someone out there would hear her call. She leaned back against the cold, cracked wall, waiting, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence stretched on, unbearable and suffocating. Time seemed to slow as she stared at the blinking lights of the communication device. Nothing. No response. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. She felt her hope begin to wither, like a flower deprived of sunlight. But then, just as she was about to give up, the device emitted a soft peep. Her heart skipped a beat, a signal. Someone had responded. With trembling hands, she activated the device, her eyes wide with disbelief. The screen flickered to life, and a voice, deep, calm, and filled with warmth, filled the air. "We hear you," the voice said. "We have received your message." For a moment, the alien widow stood frozen, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. Her mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and hope. She had been heard. After all this time, someone from another world, had heard her call. "We understand your plight," the voice continued, the words gentle but firm. "We are aware of the suffering you and your children have endured, and we are here to help." The alien widow felt a rush of emotion sweep over her, relief, joy, and disbelief all at once. She had not imagined this. Someone was answering. Someone was offering to help. But even as she felt the first stirrings of hope, doubt crept into her mind. Who were these people? What did they want in return? Could they truly help her and her children? Her hands trembled as she turned to leave the balcony, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She had to wake her children. She had to tell them the news. They were going to be okay. They would finally have a chance at a real life. As she walked back into the ruins of the palace, she looked down at her children, still asleep, their tiny bodies curled together for warmth. The weight of grief and loneliness that had held her captive for so long began to lift, replaced by something new, a sense of hope, fragile but real. Her children would know love again. They would know safety. And it was all because someone somewhere had heard her cry. As she knelt beside them, her tears fell freely, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of joy, of hope. The message had been received. They had been heard. And soon, their lives would change forever. The alien widow couldn't believe what she had heard. The hum of the communication device still echoed in her ears, the promise of a new life lingering in the air, like a dream she was too afraid to wake from. She had spent countless days praying, hoping, and waiting for a sign, for someone to hear her desperate plea across the stars. But now, that plea had been answered, and she still couldn't quite comprehend it. As the days passed since the communication, her heart remained heavy with anticipation. The ship, a vessel from a faraway world, had been dispatched. She could feel it, that quiet hum of hope deep within her, as if the very universe itself had shifted in their favor. But there was no guarantee. She had no idea how long it would take, or even what the ship would look like, or how it would reach them on this forsaken planet. But the promise was there. It was real. Her children would have a chance at a life they had never known, a life free of hunger, fear, and loneliness. She paced restlessly in the ruined shelter, looking out at the empty landscape that had once been the cradle of their civilization. The wind had begun to die down, the swirling dust settling into the cracks of the ground. But the atmosphere still felt charged with the weight of what was to come. Her children, who had been so fragile and weak for so long, were now in a quiet, hopeful slumber. Tarek, the eldest, had held on to his sister Yara with all the strength a young boy could muster. He had promised her they would survive. And now, for the first time, that promise seemed to be within reach. But as the widow's thoughts wandered to what lay ahead, she heard a faint sound, a sound that, in the silence of this desolate world, made her heart leap in her chest. It was a hum, low but steady, coming from the horizon. For a moment, she froze, unsure if she was imagining it. But then it grew louder, closer, unmistakable. Her pulse quickened as she rushed outside, her feet light with the hope she hadn't felt in so long. She scanned the sky, her eyes squinting against the fading light of the planet's twin suns, trying to discern the shape of whatever was coming. And there it was, a bright light, a ship descending slowly, like a star falling from the sky. It gleamed in the fading sunlight, its sleek silver surface reflecting the last rays of the sun. It wasn't a grand towering structure like the ship she had once seen in her youth. It was smaller, more intimate, a ship that carried not an army, but a promise of salvation. The alien widow's breath caught in her throat. She felt a lump in her throat as tears welled up in her eyes. This was real. This was happening. The ship landed softly on the cracked ground, its engines humming to a gentle stop. The dust settled, and the hatch opened with a hiss, revealing a figure in a white suit, tall and humanoid. A human. She could tell from the smooth skin, the dark eyes, the gentle but determined expression on his face. The human stepped out of the ship and walked toward her, his every movement radiating calm authority. His eyes, however, were filled with something else, something that was both foreign and familiar to her. They were filled with kindness. "You must be the one who sent the message," the human said, his voice rich and reassuring. "We heard your plea, and we've come to help." The widow nodded, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak. Her legs trembled beneath her, and she had to brace herself against the broken stone of the old palace ruins for support. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, it was almost too much to process. The human didn't wait for her to say anything. Instead, he looked at the shelter where her children slept and nodded with understanding. "I've come to take you and your children to a safe place, a place where you can begin again." The widow's heart soared. Safe, a place where they could be safe. The word felt like a lifeline, a rope thrown across an endless chasm. She could hardly believe it. "Thank you," she whispered, the words coming out choked with emotion. She had nothing left to give, nothing left to offer. But in that moment, her gratitude was all-encompassing. "You have no idea what this means to us. I thought we were lost." The human smiled softly, his gaze full of compassion. "No one should ever feel lost, especially children. No one should ever have to go through what you've been through." He turned back to the ship, his voice carrying across the barren landscape. "Come. We don't have much time. We need to leave before the planet's instability increases further." Instinctively, the alien widow rushed back into the shelter to gather her children. Tarek and Yara were still asleep, unaware of the miracle that was unfolding. She knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she gently shook Tarek awake. "Tarek," she whispered urgently. "Tarek, wake up. We're leaving. We're going to be safe. A human is here to help us. We're going to a new world." Tarek blinked, still groggy from sleep, his small face furrowed in confusion. "What? A new world?" The widow smiled, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, my son. A new world. We're going to start over." Yara stirred beside him, her wide, innocent eyes opening as she looked up at her mother. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" The widow nodded, her heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of love and relief. "Yes, sweet one. We're going to be okay." The two children didn't fully understand the magnitude of what was happening, but they trusted their mother. They trusted that whatever she said was true. Tarek's small hand reached for his mother's, his grip tight, as if to reassure her that he was ready, that he would be strong for her, just as she had always been strong for him. The widow stood up, her children now in tow, and walked toward the ship, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't know what awaited them. She didn't know what this new world would be like. But she did know one thing: it would be different. It would be better. As they climbed aboard the ship, the human offered them seats in the soft, cushioned interior, providing blankets and supplies that were far more than they had ever dared to hope for. The alien widow looked out the window, watching the ruins of her home recede into the distance. The planet that had once been full of life, now reduced to rubble, would no longer be their prison. The ship began to rise, and the widow's heart raced with exhilaration. She watched as the barren landscape shrank below them, the stars beginning to open up before them, a vast expanse of endless possibilities. She held her children close, her arms wrapped around them protectively, but with a new sense of hope, of trust. As the ship soared through the darkened sky, the alien widow looked up at the stars, at the endless universe that had seemed so cruel, so indifferent to their suffering. But now, it seemed a little less cold, a little more welcoming. The stars no longer represented isolation and despair. They represented a future where her children would grow up loved and cared for, where she could begin again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the alien widow allowed herself to believe that everything would be okay. Because, somehow, after all the darkness and pain, they have found the light.